This doggy has big features. So this is going to be very different from all the other pet portraits that I've done. These eyes are very much like animated. They're very large and they're looking up, not straight forward. So you definitely want to focus on incorporating as much detail as possible and making these eyes look very, very glossy. And that also includes making sure that you're leaving room for the highlighted features, as well as a little bit of the white of the eye. And you could see that there's a point, like an almond shape at each end. So be mindful of that as well as you're incorporating all of the details into this. So the reason why I say this dog looks very animated too is that the nose is very prominent right in front. The eyes are looking up and they're very big. The ears are coming out and the mouth is also open. So that'll be a fun part to play around with and look at and learn to draw as well. And let me know in the comments below what your favorite feature to draw from is. Like, is it the eyes, the nose, the ears, or the mouth? I really like drawing the ears a lot, but I do really like drawing the eyes because there's so much animation and personality that comes out of the eyes that I think is just really fun to draw first. What it does is it kind of like brings this portrait to life already. So it's kind of weird if I don't draw the eyes first. It just doesn't look very much alive until I do so. And since this is a blonde dog, there's a lot of blonde features that are incorporated, but you'd be surprised at the other colors that I use. So I'm using a dark sepia, a little bit of just some regular old brown color. And I'm working on the darker parts around the eye and then let it lighten up as you go around. So around a lot of these main features, you can see that the color is darker and then it gets lighter as it comes out of the features, like the nose, the eyes, and even the ears. There's even a little bit of a burnt orange color in some of these features, so just be mindful of that and incorporate it just a little bit here and there. Using a lighter pressure, not something that's too heavy, but I do like using this dark sepia to enhance some of these darker features, like in the eyebrows, and then blend a little bit of the orange and red, not really red tones, but orange and brown tones in here. There's a little bit of red in there, so you could use a burnt sienna if you want to. I don't apply too much of it though. I'm also using an embossing tool to create the whiskers. What that does is it indents into the paper so that when you're drawing over it, it actually leaves that area blank. So that's a really nice, helpful tool to use. With these ears, there's not a whole lot going on, but it's actually really nice and fun to play around with because it's very flat fur, but it's very colorful at the same time. So I'm just focusing on the highlights and then kind of working with the shadows a little bit more. That way I can create a good sense of depth to some of the folds that are happening. So in the darkest areas, I do use a black color pencil just very, very carefully. And then I use the mineral spirit oil to blend all of those colors together. That way, as I'm starting to apply more colors and details, it actually creates a little bit more of a vibrancy as well as more details with that oil that I applied. If you also want to learn to draw your own pet, you can take my 8-week program that I have on my website. It's called Learn to Draw Your Own Pet. It's linked below. And it's at your own pace, so you don't have to do the whole 8-week program all within 8 weeks. You could do it faster or slower. You can also ask me questions as you go along, but it's learning to draw different animal fur, different textured fur, as well as colored fur, different animal features, and then you learn to draw a full pet portrait as well as your own pet portrait by the very end. So if you want to learn to draw that, that will be linked below. If you also want to follow along with what I'm doing as well as helpful tips and tricks, you can sign up for my newsletter. I send out weekly emails. But moving on to the nose here. So no two nostrils look the exact same, and that's actually perfect. You don't want them to look asymmetrical. And so with this one, I'm just focusing on the highlights and the lowlights. Where's everything coming in? Where's the sun coming in from, essentially? And then kind of working up my way up from there. And then focusing on using some grays, a little bit of some purple grays, like a dark, like a sepia, light sepia and dark sepias. And then really just working on that shading, trying to make sure that that texture is still staying there, because noses have a lot of texture that's going on. But you do want to make sure you've got enough shading where it's dark enough in some features and then light enough in other features. And you still want to add some color in there too, so make sure that you're using a little bit of some brown. But it's very close to being done for the nose here. You could see I did use a little bit of that burnt sienna color to incorporate some of those warm tones, and then used an electric eraser to get a little bit of some like bump details. You can use that to create some specks or little highlights, whatever you want to do. If you're interested in the materials that I'm using, I do have an ebook on all of the materials that I do use that will be linked below as well. So with the mouth itself, just focus on the direction of the fur as best as possible. And you can use, it doesn't have to be a super sharp pencil, but just use some lighter umber, like raw umber colors, and then a little bit of some blonde or like tan colors to go along with it. But the more variety of colors you have, the more realistic the portrait's going to look. I definitely would suggest using lighter color pencils to start out with. That way you're not drawing too heavily saturated, especially when it comes to blonde fur, because there's a lot of lighter colors in this. So you just want to make sure that you're not going to make those mistakes, because it's not something that you can easily erase. And then the right ear is very similar to the left ear. There's a lot more texture that's happening, so you could see the value and the contrast between the where the sun is coming in, like the highlighted areas, and then where the shading is happening. And in that shaded area, you can see there's a lot more red happening than anywhere else. So these ears definitely look a little bit more off just because of that. But you'll see the red coming in the shoulders more so than in the rest of the face. So it'll still be very much like incorporated in it. It won't look too off, but just try to make sure that you are trying to stay cohesive with the same colors throughout the whole portrait. The head definitely takes longer than the body, so just be aware of that too. Like if you're really getting impatient with this part, just trust the process and know that it's not going to take nearly as long to do the rest of the body. I also wanted to incorporate a little bit more some texture in the ear, so I'm drawing some longer strokes and then applying a little bit of some darker tones. That way you can see the where the curve of the ear, like where the fold is actually coming in from, and also where it's like laying on the head itself. There are times that I have to use the black and come back through some of these darker features, like around the eyes or the nostrils, just to really make sure that those are nice and black, because sometimes over time I don't know what it is, but the wax will just lighten up a little bit too much, and so that's why I go back over it. And then of course I like to use the mineral spirit oil to blend some of these features together. I think it really does help to tie everything together and make it nice and blended. Even if it makes it look like it's darker, you can still go back over with other colors like lighter whites or lighter blues or pinks to lighten it up or just burnish that area overall. Another trick that I like to use is using a sepia, like all different kinds of sepia colors. So I'll use lighter sepias or darker sepias, and it's almost a brownish purple color, what that does is it kind of incorporates almost a gray brown look when you apply it. So it's not necessarily straight up brown, but it's not black either. So you kind of have that nice blend, and it still adds a really good color to the portrait. So it doesn't look so flat, because black can just be very flat, and sometimes even like a cool gray can look very flat. But now that we've gotten pretty far, you can see how that embossing tool actually created those whisker features. Whatever kind of color I applied over the top, you could see that it just went over that, but you have to be very careful about when you're applying the mineral spirit oil over it, because it does sometimes leak into it and then it just blends into the rest of it. So just be mindful of that. If that does happen, you can use a very sharp white color pencil to just burnish over the top and continue that whisker effect. But it's really nice to be able to have that feature, so you don't have to worry about creating those edges or the details later on. You also want to make sure that you're adding those little freckled parts that are the attachment to the whiskers. I don't know what they're called exactly. I guess I need to rehearse myself in animal feature descriptions because I don't know, very basic. But yeah, those are really important to incorporate so that it does look like a more realistic animal. And the mouth itself is not always fun drawing the mouth because there's so much detail that's involved. But the tongue is actually pretty fun because you could play around with the colors. I use a bright pink, incorporate some purples in there. Really just focus on the shading itself, then trying to make it look like it's detailed at all, because the tongue is not very detailed to begin with, and that's okay. But once it's touching at the teeth, the bottom of the teeth, you do want to make sure that is very nice and sharp and that it's going right up against the teeth themselves, so that it does look like it is laying behind the teeth or right on top of it. So I would definitely recommend using a sharp color pencil to do that part. But I do use a variety of some burnt siennas, some dark purples, and or not purples. Yeah, I use dark sepia, and then a light pink, like a very vibrant pink, even though you don't see it all too much, but that is incorporated in there in the first layer. And as you're continuing on with the rest of the mouth, you definitely want to leave room for the highlights and use just a very nice pale pink, kind of like a skin tone pink, to add underneath for like the fleshy colors. There's a lot that's going on with this mouth here, but it's definitely darker features, but you still want it to have some warm tones in there. So that's why I incorporated some of the pink tones to begin with. And then you do want it to be nice and shaded at the top of the mouth so that you could tell, okay, that tongue is coming from underneath the lip of the mouth, not from like the same distance, if that makes any sense. And as I'm continuing to add the details, yes, I'm using black to really darken up those features. And then I'll use a light color pencil, like the light blue or light pink, to work on the highlights. And notice how I'm still not incorporating any colors yet into the teeth. I'll apply that later on, which is usually just like one of those really light raw umber colors, because teeth are usually either like more yellow or just closer to a white color. So I do use just like a natural light yellow color to do that. But now, like, look at that tongue. It's a lot more in depth, a lot more realistic, because I've applied some shading. I've added that little middle section to the tongue. Now we're using some of that raw umber and we're just adding some shading, not a whole lot to it. I'll even use a white color pencil to burnish a little bit to let it blend in. But yeah, there's not much more to it than that. But yes, it's definitely challenging to draw open mouths. So if you're just starting out on it, don't be too hard on yourself because it is such a challenging feature to already draw. And I really sucked at it to begin with, and I still think that I could do a lot better, but that's just the way it goes. Like, you just have to keep practicing and hope that you get better as you go along. And then the rest of the body here is just the neck and then the shoulders. So just applying the same colors, and yes, this will go a lot faster than the rest of the head because there's not as many like detailed features, but we're just focusing on the direction of the fur as well as the highlights that are happening and working on the coloring too. So you want this coloring to be as cohesive to the rest of the body as possible. So later on, I do end up lightening it up quite a lot instead of having more of those red tones, mostly because with blonde dogs, depending on the type of picture and where the lighting is, it's hard to actually get the most realistic, more accurate coloring unless the client tells you, hey, this picture here, this is the exact colorings that I see in my dog the most. So you kind of have to get that out of them to be sure that you're going to be drawing the right kind of color, or they'll just ask you to fix it when you're done, which I've done that before and it's not been a problem, but you definitely want to avoid doing that. You definitely want to make sure, ask your client, hey, is this the most accurate looking color from the head to the body to your actual pet? And that way, then you can avoid having to redo those features later on. And if you are enjoying this video and you want to learn to draw your own pet, you can sign up for the 8-week program that I have. It is all inclusive of different types of fur, different colored fur, different animal features, and then by the end you get to draw your own pet portrait. And it's all at your own pace, so you can go faster, slower. You can also message me and ask me questions along the way, but that's linked below in the description. If you're interested in just taking individual classes, I also have that as an option below. But if you're just wanting to learn to draw and you want some helpful tips and tricks, I do send weekly emails on those helpful tips and tricks that might help you in the long run. It might be different tools that you might want to learn to apply, all of those kind of things. So you can sign up for that in the description below as well. But see, this bottom part, I definitely drew darker than I wanted to. So I ended up fixing that, and you'll see the fixed results in the end here. But I really hope that this video was helpful. If you do have any questions, feel free to comment down below. Like, hey, how did you get those teeth to look so real and blah, blah, blah. So this is the finished results here. I definitely incorporated more highlights in there, but thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video.